Good evening. Tonight, there is a question that has lived in the hearts of seekers for over 2,000 years, appearing in the teachings of Japanese Zen masters and Korean hermits, in Tibetan monasteries and Vietnamese riverside temples. It is this: when you see your reflection in still water, when you reach out to grasp what seems so real, what is it exactly that you are touching? Tonight, we journey through the ancient wisdom of what Buddhist teachers call the moon in the water, that luminous teaching about reflection, illusion, and the nature of reality itself. We will visit 8 complete stories from across Asia, each one revealing the same profound truth through different voices, different cultures, different moments of awakening. From the 13th century nun who carried water under moonlight to the Korean master who polished mirrors in mountain caves, from the Tibetan yogi who saw through rainbows to the Vietnamese teacher who transformed how millions understand the nature of existence. These are not brief parables but full journeys rich with detail, deep with wisdom, gentle as moonlight on water. Before we begin, if you would like, share what time it is where you are listening tonight. Let us know you are here. Through these stories, you will discover something that may change how you see everything. The thoughts you believe are so solid, the worries that keep you awake, the identity you cling to so desperately, all of it, perhaps, is as insubstantial as reflected moonlight, as beautiful and as fleeting as an image on water. And in seeing this, in truly understanding this, you may find a freedom more complete than you imagined possible. You may discover that what you have been grasping at was never really there to begin with, and that the peace you seek does not require you to change anything at all, only to see clearly what has always been true. Let your breath soften now. Feel the air moving in, cool and fresh, filling your lungs with ease. And as you breathe out, let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let whatever tension you have been carrying begin to dissolve. Your body knows how to rest. It has done this 10,000 times before. Trust it now. Sink deeper into whatever supports you, the mattress, the pillow, the weight of blankets. You are held. You are safe. If you are here tonight, carrying something heavy anxiety about tomorrow, grief over yesterday, confusion about who you are or what you should be doing, know that millions have sat with these same burdens across centuries. The teachers whose wisdom we will explore tonight knew this weight. They felt it in their own bodies, their own hearts. They offer not solutions that you must work to achieve, but understanding that dissolves confusion like morning mist under sunlight. They remind us that our struggles, however personal they feel, connect us to every human being who has ever lived. We are not alone in this darkness. These teachings come from 15 centuries of contemplation, from the Goryeo mountains of Korea to the river valleys of Vietnam, from the meditation caves of Tibet to the tea gardens of Japan. They carry insights that have been tested by millions of lives, refined through countless generations, proven by time itself. Monks and laypeople, kings and peasants, scholars and simple villagers have all found in these teachings a way to live with grace, with peace, with freedom from the suffering that comes from misunderstanding what is real. Let yourself settle now into this moment. Let yourself be exactly where you are. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing you need to figure out, no problem demanding your attention right now. Just this darkness, just your breath, just these words carrying you gently towards sleep. You are safe here, held by silence, cradled by the night. Rest now, as we begin this journey together. In the mountains of Korea, during the late Goryeo dynasty in the year 1273, there lived a monk named Jinmu, whose entire life had become a desperate search for something he could not name. He had come to the monastery at Mount Jiri when he was 19, fleeing a life that his parents had carefully arranged for him, like stones in a garden wall. They had been farmers with a modest plot of land near Jinju, and they had saved for years to secure him an apprenticeship with a respected merchant in the city. It was a good opportunity, his father had told him, a chance to rise above the soil, to make something of himself that did not require bending over rice paddies until your back became permanently curved like a sickle blade. But Jinmu had discovered something terrible about himself during his first month in that merchant's shop. Surrounded by bolts of silk and stacks of pottery, learning to calculate profits and negotiate with customers, he discovered that he could not stop thinking about death. Not in a morbid way, not with fear or fascination, but with a kind of philosophical vertigo that made everything else seem hollow. When the merchant praised him for making a good sale, Jinmu would think, "But we will both be dead in 50 years. And what will any of this have mattered?" When customers came in, excited about a wedding or a birth, he would look at them and think, "Those happy moments will fade like smoke, and suffering will come again, and then death will take everyone involved, and it will all be forgotten." It made him feel crazy. It made him feel like he was living in a different world than everyone else, watching a play where all the other actors had convinced themselves the stage was real. So one autumn evening, without telling anyone, he had walked out of the merchant's shop and kept walking until he reached Mount Jiri. He had climbed the steep paths until he found Huagi Monastery, and he had prostrated himself before the abbot, and he had said, "Please, I need to understand what is real. I cannot live in this illusion anymore." The abbot, a stern man in his 60s named Wulmyong, had looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then he had said, "You are running away." Jinmu had started to protest, but Wulmyong had held up his hand. "It does not matter. Sometimes running away is how we run toward. You can stay. But understand this. What you are looking for cannot be found by thinking about it. You are trying to use the mind to escape the mind, which is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror." That had been 6 years ago. 6 years of sitting in meditation until his knees felt like they would never straighten again. 6 years of studying sutras until the words blurred together into meaningless sounds. 6 years of serving tea to the older monks, sweeping leaves from the courtyard, copying texts by candlelight, rising at 3 in the morning to chant in the prayer hall. And through it all, that same question haunting him like a ghost. What is real? What is real? What is actually, truly, undeniably real? Wulmyong had given him what was called a hwadu, to investigate a kind of riddle without an answer, designed to exhaust the thinking mind. What was your original face before your parents were born? Jinmu was supposed to hold this question constantly, day and night, until the question itself broke apart and something else emerged. But after 6 years, nothing had broken apart. He just felt tired and increasingly desperate, watching other monks around him experience what they called openings or clear seeing, while he remained locked inside the prison of his own skull, thinking, endlessly thinking about not thinking. It was late autumn now. The maple leaves on Mount Jiri had turned crimson and gold, and they fell in slow spirals whenever the wind moved through the mountain valleys. Jinmu loved this time of year, despite his frustration. There was something about the beauty of decay, the way nature displayed impermanence so gorgeously, that felt honest to him. At least the leaves did not pretend to be eternal. They accepted their falling. One evening, After the community had finished their evening meal and the last chanting of the day, Jinmu could not bear to return to his small room. The other monks were settling in for the night, but he felt like his skin was too tight, like he might burst apart from the pressure of unanswered questions. So he walked out into the monastery grounds, past the main hall with its golden Buddha statue barely visible in the dimness, past the vegetable garden where winter squash grew on trellises, past the stone steps that led down toward the stream. There was a path he knew, one that wound through bamboo groves to a small clearing where a pond reflected the sky. He had discovered it during his first autumn here, and he returned to it whenever the monastery walls felt too close. The moon was 3 days from full, bright enough to cast shadows, and as he walked the familiar path, dried leaves crunched under his feet with sounds like whispered secrets. The bamboo swayed and creaked, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out 3 times and then fell silent. When he reached the clearing, he stopped. The pond lay before him, perhaps 30 feet across, fed by an underground spring that kept it clear and cold even in summer. The surface was perfectly still tonight, untroubled by wind or rain. And there, floating in the center of that dark water, was the moon. Not the real moon, of course. The real moon hung in the sky above him, aloof and distant. But this moon, this reflected moon, seemed somehow more present, more available. He could almost believe he could reach out and touch it. Jinmu sat down on a flat rock at the water's edge. He folded his legs beneath him, straightened his spine the way Woo-myung had taught him, placed his hands in his lap. He looked at the moon in the water and tried to return to his wadu. What was your original face before your parents were born? But the words felt dead in his mind, worn smooth by repetition until they had lost all meaning. He might as well have been asking, "What color is Tuesday?" or "How much does silence weigh?" So instead, he simply looked at the moon in the water. He noticed how perfect the reflection was, how the craters and shadows on the actual moon above were reproduced exactly in the image below. He noticed how the reflected moon seemed to float on the surface, neither rising nor sinking. He noticed how beautiful it was. This moon that was not really a moon, this light that was not really light, this thing that appeared so clearly and yet did not exist in the place where it appeared. And then, without planning to, almost without realizing what he was doing, Jinmu reached out his hand toward the water. His arm extended. His fingers reached toward that luminous circle, and the moment they touched the surface, ripples spread outward. The reflected moon shattered into 1,000 dancing fragments of light. The perfect circle broke apart, became waves of brightness that spread and intersected, creating patterns that were chaos and order simultaneously. He could see the moon still, broken into pieces, each piece moving independently. The whole image fragmented, but somehow still recognizable as what it had been. He pulled his hand back. Slowly, over perhaps 30 seconds, the ripples subsided. The water grew still again, and the moon reformed itself, perfect and whole, exactly as it had been before, as though he had never touched it, as though nothing had happened at all. Jinmu stared at his hand, then at the moon in the water, then at the actual moon above. Something was happening in his chest, a kind of pressure building, like laughter or tears or both at once. He reached out again, this time deliberately, and thrust his whole hand into the water up to his wrist. Again the moon shattered. Again it reformed when he withdrew his hand and the water stilled. He stood up and walked directly into the pond. The cold water shocked his feet, then his ankles, then his calves as he waded deeper. When he was waist deep, standing in the center of where the moon had been reflected, he looked down. There was no moon here. There was only water, dark and cold, reflecting nothing but the scattered light from the sky. The moon was still above him, unchanged. But where he stood, where the reflection had been, there was nothing at all to find. He began to laugh. Not politely, not quietly, but with great gulping sounds that echoed across the clearing and probably carried all the way back to the monastery. He laughed until he could not breathe, until he had to lean over with his hands on his knees, gasping. And then, quite suddenly, he understood. Not with his thinking mind, not with concepts or logic, but with a direct seeing that bypassed all of that entirely. The moon in the water was not real. Everyone knew that. Of course. It was common sense. Obvious. The kind of thing you would explain to a child. But he had been living his whole life, treating reflections as though they were the real thing. He had been grasping at images, at thoughts, at ideas about who he was and what life meant, and becoming upset when his fingers closed on nothing. He had been standing in the water wondering why he could not grab the moon. His sense of self, that feeling of being Jinmu, of being someone separate from the world, someone who could be insulted or praised, someone who could succeed or fail, someone who could become enlightened or remain ignorant, that was the moon in the water. It appeared so clearly. It seemed so real. He could see it, describe it, build his whole life around protecting it or perfecting it or trying to understand it. But the moment he reached for it, it scattered into fragments, and even those fragments were not really there, not in the way he thought. They were just light dancing on water, just appearances, just reflections of something else entirely. And what he had been seeking all these years, that real, true, a solid thing he could stand upon that had never been hidden. It was the water itself. It was the simple, direct, immediate experience of being aware, before thought divided it into subject and object, before concepts froze it into fixed forms. It was what had always been present, watching the moonlight, watching the thoughts about moonlight, watching the one who watched. It was so obvious that he had looked right past it, searching for something more exotic, more special, more spiritual. Jinmu waded back to shore. His robes were soaked and heavy, dripping with each step. He sat down on the rock again and looked at the pond, now rippling from his exit. The reflected moon once more broken into pieces that slowly knitted themselves back together. He felt light. He felt absurd. He felt like he had been trying to find his glasses while wearing them on his head. The real moon in the sky had not moved. It had not been affected in the slightest by anything he had done. It did not care whether he reached for its reflection or not. It simply was, shining its light impartially on ponds and mountains, on monks and merchants, on those who understood and those who did not. And the pond, too, simply was. It received the light, reflected it faithfully, and when disturbed, returned naturally to stillness. No effort required, no striving needed. Jinmu sat there until his robes began to dry, until the moon climbed higher and its angle of reflection shifted. He was not thinking about Huadus anymore. He was not searching for answers. He was simply there, breathing, aware, present. The question of what was real had not been answered, it had dissolved. Or perhaps, more accurately, he had realized he was already living the answer, had always been living it, even when he did not know. When he finally stood to return to the monastery, he paused and bowed toward the pond. Not in worship, not in gratitude exactly, but in recognition. Hello, he thought. Hello, water. Hello, moon. Hello, mountain. Hello, Jinmu, who is not really Jinmu. And then he walked back through the bamboo, through the monastery gates, back to his small room where 6 years of searching had finally, unexpectedly, run aground on a simple reflection. Master Wolmyong found him the next morning during communal breakfast. "You are different," the old monk said, not as a question, but as an observation. Jinmu smiled and said nothing. Wolmyong nodded slowly. "The moon in the water?" he asked. Jinmu laughed. "And the water itself, and the hand that reached, and the one who thought there was reaching." Wolmyong smiled then, his stern face softening. "Yes," he said. "Yes, that too." Now, consider what Jinmu discovered that night in the pond. He spent 6 years desperately trying to grasp something real, something solid, something he could stand upon without fear that it would dissolve or disappoint him. And in the end, what broke through his searching was not a new insight or a special state of consciousness or a reward for his efforts. It was simply seeing clearly what had always been obvious. The moon in the water is not the moon. The reflection is not the thing reflected. And yet, how much of our lives do we spend reaching for reflections, becoming upset when they shatter under our touch? Think about how this appears in your own experience. When you lie awake at night, replaying a conversation, worrying about what someone thought of you, rehearsing what you should have said, what are you grasping at? A reflection. A mental image of yourself, of the other person, of the interaction. None of it is actually present. It is all moon in water, appearing vividly in the mind, but having no substance outside of that appearance. And yet you reach for it, try to fix it, try to make it different, and suffer when it slips through your fingers like ripples on a pond. Or consider how we build elaborate identities, stories about who we are. I am successful. I am a failure. I am a good person. I am broken. I am trying to heal. All of these are reflected images, appearing in the water of consciousness. They seem so solid, so undeniably real. We defend them, polish them, hide parts of them, constantly adjust them to maintain a coherent picture. And yet, if we look directly at this self, we are protecting and perfecting. If we reach for it the way Jinmu reached into the pond, what do we find? Ripples. Thoughts about thoughts. Images that scatter when examined closely, that reform when attention relaxes, but that never resolve into anything we can grasp and say, "Here, this is it. This is me." This does not mean you do not exist. The moon exists. The pond exists. The light bouncing off the water exists. But the image of the moon in the water exists in a different way than the moon itself. It is dependent, contingent, empty of independent reality. You exist in the same way, appearing vividly, functioning perfectly well, but empty of the solid, separate, permanent self you imagine yourself to be. And here is where the teaching becomes not just philosophical, but deeply practical. When you stop reaching for the moon in the water, when you stop trying to perfect the reflection, when you stop grasping at the image of who you think you are or should be, what happens? The water becomes still, naturally, effortlessly, without you doing anything to make it still. It settles back into its own nature. And in that stillness, the reflection appears even more clearly, not because you improved it, but because you stopped disturbing it. Let your breath flow easily now. Feel how it happens without your management, without your control. It knows its own rhythm, its own depth. Your body is like the pond, settling into stillness when you stop churning it with effort and striving. Your mind is like the water, reflecting everything clearly when you stop trying to grasp what you see. And here is the deepest truth Jinmu discovered. The moon he was reaching for was not real. Yes, but the light was real. The awareness that perceived the reflection was real. The simple presence of being here, being aware, being alive, that was real in a way that cannot be broken by ripples or dissolved by analysis. It is the water itself, the capacity to reflect, the openness that allows images to appear and disappear without being damaged by their coming and going. You are not the reflection you see in the mirror of thought. You are the awareness that sees the reflection. You are the space in which thoughts appear, including thoughts about who you are. And that awareness, that space, that fundamental capacity for experience, it is not something you need to achieve or perfect. It is already here. It has always been here. It is what is reading these words right now, what is breathing, what is aware of breathing. It requires no effort to be present because it is presence itself. Rest with this. Do not try to understand it with thinking. Just notice that awareness is happening. Notice that there is something here that knows you are here, that experiences this moment without needing it to be different, that is closer to what you really are than any story you tell yourself. That is the moon itself, not its reflection. And it is always shining, always present, whether the water is still or disturbed, whether you are reaching or resting, whether you are confused or clear. Let these words sink into the darkness behind your closed eyes. Let them settle like leaves falling on still water. You do not need to remember them. You do not need to grasp them. Just let them be here, with you, as you drift towards sleep. The moon is shining. The water is settling. All is as it should be. Now we journey from the mountain ponds of Korea, across the sea to Japan, to the city of Kyoto in the year 1637, to meet a young woman whose awakening would inspire poets and practitioners for centuries to come. Her name was Chiono, and before she became a nun, she was something quite different, the daughter of a samurai family, betrothed to a man she had never loved, preparing for a life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. She had been 17 when the marriage was arranged. Her father was a minor official in the Tokugawa shogunate, and the match was politically advantageous, tying their family to a wealthier clan with connections to the shogun's court. The man was 43, already widowed twice, with children older than Chiono herself. When she met him for the formal betrothal ceremony, he had looked at her the way her father looked at the horses he was considering buying, evaluating, assessing value, checking for flaws that might reduce her price. She had smiled. She had bowed. She had said all the correct things. And inside, something was dying. Not dramatically, not with a scream, but with the quiet resignation of someone watching a door close on a room they would never enter. She had always been told she would marry. Of course, that was the shape of a woman's life. But she had secretly hoped it might be different somehow, that she might find someone who saw her as more than a transaction, who might be curious about what she thought, who might care whether she was happy or just obedient. Instead, she had 3 months until the wedding. 3 months to prepare to become someone she was not, to slip into a role that fit like iron shoes, heavy and cold and shaped for someone else's feet. She spent those months learning the tea ceremony, practicing the proper way to serve her husband, memorizing the expectations that would govern every hour of her days. And at night, alone in her room, she would sit by the window and look at the stars and feel like she was already a ghost, already dead, just waiting for the world to notice. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, something happened that changed everything. A Buddhist nun came to their house to deliver a donation receipt to her father. The nun was perhaps 60 years old, with a shaved head and a robe that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what its original color had been. She was not impressive. She was not beautiful or scholarly or imposing. But when Chiono served her tea, the nun looked at her, truly looked at her, and Chiono felt seen for perhaps the first time in her life. "You are suffering," the nun said quietly, when Chiono's parents had left the room briefly. It was not a question. Chiono felt tears start and fought them back. "I am fine," she said. "I am very fortunate." The nun smiled slightly. "Yes, you are fortunate, and you are suffering. Both can be true." She paused, sipped her tea. "There is another way to live, you know. Not better, necessarily. Not easier, but different. Free." Before Chiono could respond, her parents returned. The nun thanked them for their hospitality, rose, and left. But something remained in the room after she was gone, like a question hanging in the air, like a door that had been closed now standing slightly ajar. What did free mean? What was this other way? Chiono began to find excuses to visit the Buddhist temple in the city, telling her parents she was shopping for her wedding trousseau or visiting friends. She would sit in the back of the meditation hall during services, watching the nuns and monks chant, watching how they moved with a kind of deliberate grace, watching how their faces seemed peaceful in a way she had never seen in the samurai households where everyone was constantly performing status and control. One day, the same nun she had met saw her there. "You keep coming back," the nun said. "Are you curious about the teachings?" Chiono found herself nodding. "I do not know what I am," she said. "I only know that when I am here, I feel like I can breathe." The nun nodded. "That is enough to begin," she said. "Come tomorrow. I will teach you to meditate." What happened next was the kind of decision that looks insane from the outside and inevitable from within. 1 week before her wedding, Chiono left a letter for her parents, gathered a few belongings, and walked to the temple before dawn. She found the nun she had spoken to, whose name was Ryonen, and she prostrated herself on the temple floor and said, "Please ordain me. Please teach me. I do not want to live the life I am supposed to live. I want to understand what is real." Her father came to the temple that same day, furious, threatening to drag her home by force. The temple abbot, a quiet man named Buko, met with him for 3 hours. Chiono never knew what was said in that meeting, but when her father left, he did not take her with him. He did not speak to her again for 12 years, but he let her stay. So Chiono became a nun, taking vows of renunciation, shaving her head, wearing the simple robes that marked her new life. And she discovered immediately that she had no idea what she was doing. The teachings were complex, filled with foreign words and concepts that felt slippery and hard to grasp. The meditation was difficult, her body aching from sitting still, her mind churning with thoughts and regrets and fears about whether she had made a terrible mistake. The other nuns were kind but distant. perhaps not sure what to make of this girl from a samurai family who had thrown away a comfortable life for reasons she could not clearly articulate even to herself. But she stayed. She woke at 3 in the morning to chant. She scrubbed floors. She copied sutras. She sat in meditation until her knees screamed. And slowly, something began to shift. The noise in her mind did not disappear, but she began to notice that there was something else, something silent and vast, that contained the noise without being disturbed by it. Like the sky contains clouds without becoming cloudy itself. Buko gave her meditation instructions. He was a master of the Rinzai Zen tradition, known for his fierce teaching style and his ability to meet each student exactly where they were. To Chiyono, he was gentler than he was with the others. "You are carrying a great deal of shame," he told her once. "Shame about leaving your family. Shame about disappointing your father. Shame about wanting something different than what was expected. All this shame is like a weight you are dragging around. But listen carefully. There is nothing to be ashamed of. You were suffering. You sought a way to be free from suffering. This is the most natural, most human thing possible. It is what the Buddha did. It is what we all must do. Eventually, the only difference is that most people wait until they are dying to realize they need to escape the prison they built for themselves. You realized it at 17. Still, understanding something intellectually and releasing it are different things. Chiyono continued to feel burdened. She continued to doubt. She wondered often if she had acted selfishly, if she had hurt her parents unnecessarily, if there had been some other way to find what she was seeking without causing so much pain. These thoughts would circle in her mind during meditation, disrupting any peace she managed to touch. The years passed. 3 years. 5. 7. She was 24 years old now, no longer the girl who had fled her wedding, but not yet the woman she was becoming. She was somewhere in between, practicing diligently, studying earnestly, but still feeling like there was something fundamental she was missing, some final understanding that would make everything click into place. It was autumn when it happened, the same season when she had first met Ryanan 7 years earlier. The maple leaves were falling again, and there was a chill in the evening air that spoke of the coming winter. One night, after evening meditation, Chiyono volunteered to fetch water from the well for the next morning's tea ceremony. It was a simple task, one she had done hundreds of times. She took an old wooden bucket, worn smooth by decades of use, held together by bamboo strips that had been soaked and bent into hoops around its staves. The moon was full that night, hanging huge and luminous above the temple roofs. As Chiyono lowered the bucket into the well, she could see the moon reflected perfectly in the dark water below. It looked like she was reaching down to capture light itself. She drew the bucket up, careful not to spill, and began walking back toward the temple building. The water sloshed slightly with each step, and she could see the moon dancing in the bucket's surface, fragmenting and reforming with each ripple. And then, without warning, one of the old bamboo strips broke. Just snapped, aged wood giving way. The bottom of the bucket fell out completely, and the water rushed to the ground, splashing over her feet, soaking into the earth. The moon's reflection vanished instantly, not gradually, not fading, but simply gone as though it had never existed at all. One moment there had been a moon in the bucket. The next moment, nothing. Just darkness, just air, just the space where water and reflection had been. Chiyono stood there holding the broken bucket, water dripping from the remaining bamboo strips. She looked at the empty space where the moon had been reflected. She looked at the puddle on the ground where the water had spilled. She looked up at the real moon in the sky, unchanged, indifferent, shining exactly as it had been shining all along. And something broke open inside her chest. Something that had been held tight for 7 years, for 17 years, perhaps for lifetimes. She began to laugh, and then to cry, and then could not tell the difference between the two. She dropped the broken bucket and stood there with water still dripping from her hands, face tilted up toward the moon, feeling like every cell in her body was suddenly, blazingly awake. The moon in the bucket had never really existed. It had appeared so clearly, so beautifully, so convincingly real. But it had been entirely dependent on conditions: the water, the bucket, the angle of light. The moment those conditions changed, it vanished without a trace. It had never been substantial. It had never been solid. It had only been appearance, beautiful and temporary, and ultimately empty of any independent existence. And she was the same. Chiyono, the samurai's daughter. Chiyono, the reluctant bride. Chiyono, the guilty runaway. Chiyono, the struggling nun. All of these were reflections in the bucket of her mind. They appeared real because conditions made them appear. Memory, thought, identity, the story. These were the water and the bucket. But the moon they reflected was no more substantial than the one she had been carrying. It was beautiful. It functioned perfectly well. But it was not truly her. It was not what she actually was beneath the appearance. And when those conditions changed, when the stories fell apart, when the identity could not hold itself together anymore, when the bucket broke, what remained? Not nothing, not blackness, not death, but the moon itself, shining steadily, unchanged by the coming or going of any reflection. The awareness that had always been present, the simple fact of being here, being conscious, being alive before any story tried to explain it, or capture it, or preserve it in a bucket. She understood in that moment something that had eluded her through 7 years of practice. She had been trying so hard to polish the reflection, to perfect Chiyono, to make herself worthy, to become enlightened, to achieve some special state that would finally make her acceptable and complete. But the reflection was never the problem. The reflection was fine exactly as it was. The problem was taking the reflection to be the real thing, mistaking the image for what it portrayed, grasping at the moon in the water and becoming frustrated when it scattered. Buko found her there in the morning, sitting on the ground beside the broken bucket, still smiling. "Tell me," he said simply. And she spoke the poem that would become famous, that would be quoted and painted and calligraphed for centuries after her death. This way and that way, I tried to keep the bucket intact, hoping the weak bamboo would never break. Suddenly, the bottom fell out. No more water, no more moon in the water, emptiness in my hand. Buko nodded slowly. Then he bowed to her, formally, student to teacher. She had graduated, not from being Chiyono, but from believing that Chiyono was all she was. The bucket had broken. The water had spilled. The moon had vanished. And what remained was free. Now rest with Chiyono's discovery. She spent 7 years trying to perfect herself, trying to become someone worthy of enlightenment, trying to repair all the broken places inside her until she could finally deserve peace. And then one night, a bucket broke, and she realized that what she had been trying to preserve was already broken, had always been broken, was supposed to be broken, because it was not real in the first place. It was reflection, appearance, moon in water, and the breaking of it did not damage anything essential. It only revealed what had been true all along. How often do we live like Chiyono before that night, carefully holding our identities together, worried that if we let go, if the bucket breaks, if the story falls apart, there will be nothing left? We patch and repair and shore up and protect this image of who we are, terrified of what might happen if it shatters. But the teaching whispers something radical. Let it break. Let the bucket fall apart. Let the water spill. Let the moon reflection vanish. What you are afraid of losing was never yours to keep anyway. It was only borrowed light, beautiful but temporary, appearing for a while and then gone. And when it goes, when the identity you have worked so hard to construct and maintain finally proves itself too fragile to last, what is actually lost? The real you, the awareness, the presence, the simple fact of being here that does not disappear, that cannot disappear. It is like the moon in the sky, shining steadily whether your bucket holds water or not, whether the reflection appears or not, whether you understand this or not. It is prior to the reflection. It is the source of the light that creates the reflection. It is what you have always been, even when you believed you were only the image on the water. In modern language, we might say that Chiyono realized the difference between her narrative self and her actual being. The narrative self is the story, the past that explains you, the identity that defines you, the future you are trying to create. This self is like the moon in the bucket. It appears coherent and continuous. It seems undeniably real, but it is constructed moment by moment from memory and imagination, constantly requiring maintenance, constantly threatened by anything that does not fit its story. It is exhausting to be this self. It is like carrying water in a bucket with holes, constantly refilling it, terrified of the moment it runs dry. The actual being, that which is aware of all this, that which experiences life directly before narrative packages it into familiar shapes, that is like the moon itself. It does not need maintenance. It does not need protection. It cannot be damaged by anything that happens to the story, because it is prior to story. When the bucket breaks, when your carefully constructed identity falls apart because of grief or failure, or simply the grinding pressure of time, this being is untouched. It sees the breaking. It experiences the falling apart. But it is not diminished by it. This is not comforting in an easy way. It does not mean you will never suffer, never fail, never experience the pain of loss. The bucket will break. The reflection will vanish. This is the nature of all conditioned things. But there is a kind of freedom in accepting this, in not spending all your energy trying to make the impermanent permanent, in allowing the water to spill when it needs to spill. The moon will still be there when the dust settles. You will still be there, beneath and beyond the story, exactly as you have always been. Let your body release into that understanding now. Let the bucket break. Let the water spill. Let the identity you have been protecting so carefully rest for a while. You do not need to be anyone in particular right now. You do not need to maintain any story. Just be here, breathing, present, aware, like the moon shining on water, shining on mountains, shining on nothing in particular, simply shining because that is its nature. You are here because being here is your nature. No effort required, no story needed. Just this, just breath, just now. The space is widening now between thoughts. The urgency is softening. Let yourself drift on this understanding, carried by it like a leaf on a stream, requiring nothing from you, offering you complete rest. We journey now from Japan in the 17th century, backward through time to 2nd century India, to a teaching so ancient it appears in the Pali Canon itself, recorded by those who knew the Buddha or learned from those who did. This is a story not about seeing the moon in water, but about seeing how thirst itself creates the reflections we chase. In the city of Savatthi, during the time when the Buddha walked these roads teaching, there lived a man named Ananda, not the famous disciple Ananda who served as the Buddha's personal attendant, but another man, a merchant, whose name happened to be the same. This Ananda sold grain from his warehouse near the city walls, and he had done well for himself over the years. He owned 3 houses, employed a dozen servants, and had sufficient wealth that he could have lived comfortably without working for the rest of his life. And yet, he was miserable. Not obviously miserable, he smiled when conducting business. He maintained the proper social courtesies. He fulfilled his obligations to his family and his temples. But inside, he felt like a man dying of thirst. Nothing satisfied him. Every acquisition of more wealth left him wanting more. Every pleasure faded almost before it was fully tasted, leaving behind a hollow ache. He would close a profitable deal and feel a brief spark of satisfaction, and then, almost immediately, that satisfaction would transform into anxiety. What if the next deal failed? What if his competitors found better suppliers? What if everything he had built collapsed? He was 53 years old, and he had spent his entire adult life believing that if he could just accumulate enough, to achieve enough, secure enough, he would finally feel at peace. He would finally arrive at some destination where the wanting would stop. But it never stopped. It only changed shape, becoming more desperate and more exhausting with each passing year. Now he found himself waking at 3 in the morning, his heart racing with formless anxiety, his mind churning through calculations and worries, unable to remember when he had last slept deeply or felt genuinely happy for more than a few fleeting moments. One day, a traveling merchant came to his warehouse with grain from the eastern provinces. While they were negotiating prices, the merchant mentioned that the Buddha was currently staying at a monastery just outside the city, teaching anyone who came to listen. He speaks about the end of suffering. The merchant said, "I heard him yesterday. I cannot explain what he said exactly, but something about his words felt true, like remembering something you always knew but had forgotten." Ananda the merchant found himself unaccountably moved by this description. He had heard of the Buddha. Of course, everyone had. But he had dismissed him as another religious teacher, another person selling a different kind of product, salvation instead of grain, but still essentially a transaction. Give me your faith, your obedience, your devotion, and I will give you heaven. It had never interested him. But something about the phrase "the end of suffering" caught in his mind like a hook. What if such a thing were possible? Not happiness exactly, not pleasure, but an end to this gnawing want, this endless thirst that made everything taste like ashes? That afternoon, instead of returning to his accounts, Ananda walked to the monastery. It was a simple place, built with donations from local supporters, just a cluster of wooden buildings and meditation halls surrounded by trees. He found the Buddha sitting under one of those trees, speaking to a small group of monks and lay followers. Ananda sat at the edge of the gathering, intending to listen skeptically, to evaluate whether this teacher had anything genuinely useful to say or was just another charismatic charlatan. The Buddha was speaking about a teaching he called dependent origination, the way suffering arises from causes and conditions in a chain of reactions, each link giving rise to the next. Ananda found it difficult to follow at first. There was something about contact and feeling, about craving and clinging, about becoming and birth. It sounded abstract, philosophical, not particularly relevant to his actual life. But then the Buddha said something that made Ananda sit up straighter, suddenly paying full attention. Imagine, the Buddha said, a person dying of thirst in the desert. The sun is merciless. The sand stretches endlessly in all directions. This person is desperate for water, willing to give everything for a single drink. And then, in the distance, they see something shimmering. A lake. Water. Salvation. So they run toward it, stumbling, falling, dragging themselves forward with the last of their strength. But as they approach, the lake vanishes. It was a mirage, just heat rising from sand, just tricks of light that looked like what they desperately wanted to see. But they do not stop. They cannot stop. Because now they see another shimmer in a different direction. Another lake. Another promise of satisfaction. And they run toward that one. And it too vanishes. And so they spend their life running from one mirage to another, dying of thirst all the while, never noticing the real water that might be available if they stopped running and looked carefully. The Buddha paused. Let this image settle. This is how we live. We see our happiness shimmering in the distance in wealth, in romance, in success, in pleasures of all kinds. We run toward these mirages, convinced that, when we reach them, we will finally be satisfied. But the nature of these things is that they cannot satisfy. They are like salt water, they increase thirst rather than quenching it. We drink deeply of wealth, of status, of sensual pleasure, and we only become thirstier. We acquire one thing and immediately want the next. We achieve one goal and immediately see a new goal to chase. We are running from mirage to mirage, becoming more desperate, more exhausted, more trapped with every step. Ananda felt something crack open in his chest. This was his life. Exactly his life. The mirages were profits and acquisitions, were the approval of his peers, were the hope that one more successful deal would finally make him feel secure. He had been running from one to another for 35 years, and he was still thirsty, still dying, still never finding the satisfaction that always seemed just one more step away. But the Buddha was not finished. Now, he continued, why do these mirages appear? They appear because of thirst itself. A person who is not dying of thirst looks at heat rising from sand and sees it clearly interesting optical phenomenon, but obviously not water. The thirst makes the mirage seem real. The craving makes the illusion convincing. So what is the solution? Not better mirages, not cleverer ways to find water in the desert, but understanding the nature of thirst itself. Where does it come from? How does it operate? And can it be released? After the teaching, Ananda approached the Buddha. He bowed formally and said, "Sir, I am a merchant. I have spent my life accumulating wealth, believing it would bring me peace. It has not. I have everything I thought I wanted, and I am the most miserable I have ever been. How do I stop running? How do I stop thirsting?" The Buddha looked at him with what felt like perfect understanding, no judgment, just clarity. You cannot stop by trying to stop. That would be like trying to drink less salt water by drinking it more carefully. What you can do is investigate the thirst itself. When you feel that wanting, that need, That sense that something is missing instead of immediately running after the next thing that promises to fill it. Pause. Look at the wanting itself. Feel it in your body. Notice how it arises, how it pushes, how it creates the mirage of future satisfaction. Just see it clearly, without trying to change it or get rid of it. Just see it. And then, Ananda asked, then keep seeing it. Keep paying attention. Because when you see the wanting clearly enough, when you understand how it operates, it begins to lose its power over you. Not because you have suppressed it, but because you have seen through it. You realize that the wanting itself creates the mirage, that what you are chasing does not exist in the way you think it does. The mirage dissolves not when you reach it, but when you stop believing in it, and then you can rest. Then you can be satisfied with what is actually here, rather than constantly reaching for what is always elsewhere. Ananda stayed at the monastery for 3 months, learning to meditate, learning to watch his mind create desires and cravings moment by moment, learning to see how each one arose from previous conditions and gave birth to future suffering. It was not easy. His entire identity was wrapped up in wanting, in striving, in achieving. To sit still and simply observe how his mind operated felt like dying. But gradually, something shifted. The desperate quality of the wanting began to ease. He still had preferences. He still made plans. But the sense of being driven, of being enslaved to an endless thirst that started to dissolve like salt melting in water. When he finally returned to his business, he ran it very differently. He worked when work was needed. He stopped when it was not. He engaged with his wealth without clinging to it, understanding now that it was a tool, not a salvation. He had not become a saint. He still felt irritation and desire, but he was no longer running from mirage to mirage, no longer dying of thirst while standing in the middle of plenty. Years later, when asked by a friend what he had learned, Ananda said simply, "I learned that I was the one creating the mirages. My thirst painted them on the desert. And when I saw this clearly, when I truly understood that I was dying of thirst for things that were not actually water, the whole game stopped. Not because I became enlightened or special, but because I saw the trick I was playing on myself. And you cannot keep playing a trick once you fully understand how it works." Now feel how this ancient teaching touches modern life. We live in a world that has turned mirage creation into an art form. Every advertisement, every social media scroll, every comparison with our neighbors creates new shimmers in the distance. New things that promise, if we only reach them, if we only achieve them, if we only acquire them, we will finally be satisfied. We will finally enough. We will finally rest. But notice your own experience. How many times have you achieved something you desperately wanted, only to find that the satisfaction lasted a few days or weeks before new wanting arose? The promotion you craved, the relationship you chased, the purchase you saved for they delivered perhaps a flicker of contentment. And then almost immediately, the mind began scanning for the next thing, the next achievement, the next acquisition that would surely, to finally bring lasting happiness. This is not because you chose the wrong goals. It is because the wanting itself, the thirst itself, creates mirages that dissolve when reached. Consider how social media operates on exactly this principle. You scroll through images of others' apparent success, their curated moments of beauty and accomplishment, and your mind automatically creates a sense of lack. You are not there yet. You do not have that yet. You are not measuring up. These are mirages painted by comparison, by the thirst to be seen as successful or attractive or interesting. And chasing them is exhausting because they recede with every step. The more you post seeking validation, the more you need validation. The more you acquire to display your status, the more status you need to feel secure. The thirst increases with drinking. But here is what the Buddha taught Ananda and what Ananda discovered for himself. The thirst is not wrong. It is not something to be ashamed of or violently suppressed. It is simply a pattern of mind, arising from conditions, generating suffering when unexamined. When you see it clearly, when you understand how it works, you stop being enslaved by it. You can still want things. You can still have preferences and goals, but you are no longer dying of thirst in the desert, running desperately from one shimmering promise to the next. How do you see it clearly? The same way Ananda learned. When the wanting arises, whether it is wanting a different body, a better job, a more understanding partner, a life free from current difficulties, pause. Do not immediately reach for the mirage. Do not scroll for distraction. Do not open your wallet or your dating app or your refrigerator. Just stop and feel the wanting itself. Where is it in your body? Is it a tightness in your chest, a hollowness in your belly, a restless energy in your limbs? What are the thoughts that accompany it? What stories is it telling about future satisfaction? About what your life will be like when you finally get what you want? And here is the key: do not try to make the wanting go away. That is just another form of wanting to not want. Just see it. Just be with it. Investigate it like a curious scientist examining an interesting phenomenon. Notice how it arises. Notice how it changes. Notice how it creates fantasies of future relief. Notice how it pulls your attention away from what is actually present right now. Just notice. Again and again. Patiently. Kindly. Without judgment. When you do this, something remarkable happens. Not immediately. Not like flipping a switch. But gradually. Like ice melting. The wanting begins to reveal itself as what it actually is, a pattern of thought and sensation, arising and passing, ultimately empty of the solid reality it appears to have. It is like realizing that the monster in the dark is just a coat hanging on a door. Still there, still visible, but no longer terrifying once you see what it actually is. The coat does not vanish, but your relationship to it changes completely. And when that happens, when you see the mirage as a mirage, you stop running. Not because you have arrived somewhere, but because you realize there was nowhere to arrive at. The water you needed was already here. The contentment you were seeking was already present in the simple capacity to be aware, to be alive, to experience this moment exactly as it is. Not perfect, not special, not fulfilling every fantasy, but sufficient, enough, complete in itself. Let yourself rest in that completeness now. You do not need to acquire anything else to be whole. You do not need to achieve anything else to deserve peace. You do not need to become anyone else to be acceptable. Those are mirages, beautiful and convincing, but ultimately made of the same substance as dreams. They appear because of wanting, and they dissolve when wanting is seen clearly. What remains when they dissolve is not emptiness or loss, but the simple, steady, undramatic presence of your life as it actually is. Breathing in this darkness, resting in this moment. Already complete, already enough. Let that truth settle into your bones. Let it sink beneath thought. You are not running anymore. You have stopped. And what you find here, in this stopping is what you were looking for all along. Not elsewhere. Not tomorrow. Not after one more achievement or acquisition. Here, now. This. Rest in this. Trust this. You have arrived. You were always already arrived. You just did not know it until the running stopped. Sleep is near now, soft and welcoming. Let these teachings carry you into it. Let the understanding sink into places words cannot reach. You do not need to remember any of this. You do not need to grasp these insights. Just let them be with you as you drift. The moon is shining. The water is settling. The thirst is easing. All is well, exactly as it is. Rest now, deeply and completely. Rest. Let your breathing soften now, becoming slower and deeper, like waves receding on a shore. Each exhale releases a little more of the day's accumulation. Each inhale brings fresh clarity, though you need not strain to receive it. Your body knows how to do this dance without your supervision. Trust it now. We travel from ancient India to Tang Dynasty China, to the 9th century, to meet one of the most uncompromising teachers in all of Buddhist history, a man so fierce in his compassion, so absolute in his refusal to comfort delusion, that students trembled before him. His name was Huangbo Shiyun, and the mountain monastery where he taught became legendary for producing awakened monks who could not be fooled by anything, including their own minds. There was a young scholar named Pei Shu who came to Mount Huangbo in the year 845. Pei was not a nobody seeking spiritual refuge. He was a minister in the Tang imperial court, educated in Confucian classics, versed in poetry and calligraphy, a man accustomed to being the most intelligent person in any room he entered. He had read every Buddhist sutra he could acquire. He had studied philosophy with several teachers. He considered himself, if not enlightened, then certainly well along the path. He had a sophisticated understanding of emptiness, of interdependence, of the nature of mind. Or so he believed. What brought him to Huangbo was not humility, but curiosity. He had heard that this Chan master taught something called sudden enlightenment, claimed that Buddha nature was immediately present and available, required no gradual cultivation or accumulation of merit. It sounded too simple, perhaps even heretical. Pei wanted to investigate, to understand how such a teaching could be reconciled with the sutras he had studied so carefully, with the stages of practice described in the traditional texts. When Pei arrived at the monastery, he was shown into a simple hall where Huangbo sat. The master was an imposing figure, unusually tall, with a small lump on his forehead that made him look perpetually as though he were about to charge forward into battle. His eyes were dark and penetrating. He did not rise when Pei entered. He did not bow, though Pei's rank entitled him to such courtesy. He simply looked at the scholar for a long moment and said, "Why are you here?" Pei began to explain his interest in the Dharma, his questions about sudden enlightenment, his desire to understand the master's teaching. Huangbo listened without expression. When Pei finished, the master said, "Everything you just said is garbage. Mental trash. You are wearing understanding like fancy clothes, hoping it will make you look spiritual. But understanding is not knowing. Concepts about emptiness are not emptiness. Ideas about mind are not mind itself." Pei felt heat rise in his face. He was accustomed to respect, to being praised for his intelligence and learning. This blunt dismissal stung. "Then what should I do?" he asked, trying to keep his voice level. How should I approach the teaching? Stop approaching, Huangbo said. Stop trying to get somewhere. Stop trying to become something. You already are what you are looking for. But you cannot see it because you are constantly thinking about it instead of simply being it. It is like trying to see your own face without a mirror. The seeing and the face are the same thing. But the moment you try to grasp this, the moment you turn it into an object of understanding, you create separation where none exists. Pei was trained in dialectics. He could not help but engage. But Master, the sutras teach about stages of practice, about gradually purifying the mind. How can you say there is nothing to do? Huangbo's response was immediate and sharp. The sutras are medicine for sick people who think they need curing. But tell me, what illness does space have? Does the sky need purification? Does emptiness need improvement? Your true nature is like empty space. It is already pure, already complete. All your efforts to purify it are like trying to wash air. You are creating the very problem you are trying to solve. This conversation went on for hours. Every time Pei offered an argument, a question, a philosophical position, Huangbo demolished it. Not with superior logic, but by pointing out that all of it was mental gymnastics, entertainment for the thinking mind, a way of avoiding the simple, direct, immediate fact of awareness itself. Pei left that first encounter feeling confused, frustrated, and strangely exhilarated. It was as though someone had kicked over a carefully arranged chessboard, scattering all the pieces. His understanding had been challenged at its root. He stayed at the monastery for weeks, then months. He attended Huangbo's teachings, engaged in debates with other monks, sat in meditation. And gradually, his sophisticated understanding began to crack apart. Not because he learned something new, but because he began to see how his understanding itself was the obstacle. One afternoon, Pei was copying a sutra in the monastery library. It was meditative work, brush on paper, character after character, requiring precision and presence. He had done this thousands of times. But today, something was different. As his hand moved across the page, he suddenly noticed that there was awareness of the hand moving, and awareness of awareness, and awareness of the awareness of awareness. It was like standing between two mirrors, each reflecting the other into infinity. Which awareness was the real one? Which was him? He set down his brush and sat very still. Where was the one who was copying? Where was the copier? He could find the hand, the brush, the paper, the thought I am copying. But when he looked for the one who all of this was happening to, there was only looking, only awareness itself, empty and luminous, requiring no subject to be aware and no object to be aware of. It was simply here, naked and obvious, the space in which all experience appeared and disappeared like reflections playing on a mirror's surface. Pei stood up and walked quickly to find Huangbo. The master was in the garden, pruning a persimmon tree. Pei bowed deeply. "Master," he said, his voice unsteady, "I think I understand. Mind is not a thing. It is like a mirror. It reflects everything perfectly without being changed by what it reflects. Thoughts appear in it, like images appearing on its surface. But the mirror itself remains empty, clear, untouched." Huangbo looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, in a tone that was both gentle and merciless, "You are still thinking. The moment you say, mind is like a mirror, you have created subject and object. You have turned the mirror into a thing, a concept. Let me ask you something. If mind is like a mirror, who is holding the mirror? Who is looking at it? Can the mirror see itself? Pei opened his mouth to answer and found he had nothing to say. The analogy that had seemed so perfect a moment ago now revealed itself as another trap, another way of making an object out of what cannot be objectified. Listen carefully. Huangbo continued, his voice quiet but penetrating. When I say one mind, I do not mean there is a mind somewhere that you need to find or understand. One mind means this very awareness right now, before you divide it into knower and known, before you separate it into self and other, before you turn it into a concept or a goal. It is not like anything. It is not a mirror or a flame or empty space or any other comparison. Those comparisons are useful to point, but the pointing is not the moon. Pei stood there, feeling something inside him dissolve. Not pleasantly, not like some mystical experience of bliss, more like the ground disappearing beneath his feet. If mind was not like anything, if it could not be grasped or understood or compared to something else, then all his learning, all his careful study, all the conceptual frameworks he had built, what were they? Reflections. Moon in water. Elaborate structures built from thought, appearing solid but having no substance outside their own appearing. You see it now, Huangbo said, and for the first time, Pei heard warmth in his voice. You see that everything you know about Buddhism, everything you have studied and memorized and understood, it is all moon in water. Beautiful, useful, functionally effective, but ultimately empty of any independent existence. The real moon has been shining this whole time. You were just so busy studying its reflection that you forgot to look up. Pei felt tears on his face. Not tears of sadness, not tears of joy. Just tears, appearing and falling, like everything else. So, what do I do now? He asked. Now you stop asking, what do I do now? Huangbo said. You just live. Eat when hungry. Sleep when tired. Study sutras when study is needed. Help people when help is called for. But you do it without the ghost of I am doing following you around, commenting on everything, trying to make sense of it all. The doing happens. The awareness is present. But there is no separate doer anymore. No one accumulating spiritual merit. No one becoming enlightened. Just this. Just now. Just awareness being aware, which is what it has always been doing, whether you noticed or not. Years later, when Pei Xiu compiled Huangbo's teachings into the text that would become famous as the transmission of mind, he wrote in his preface words that could only come from someone who had walked this path himself. All the Buddhas and sentient beings are nothing but one mind, beside which nothing exists. This mind is without beginning or end, is unborn and indestructible. It is not green or yellow, has no shape or form. It cannot be grasped by attachment nor released by detachment. It is not within or without, comes not with time or place, and has nothing to do with being or non-being. Yet the moment we speak of it, we create an object, and thus we are already deceiving ourselves. Therefore, the only true transmission is the transmission of no thing at all, the recognition that what we are looking for is what is doing the looking. Now rest with what Pei Xiu discovered. He came to Huangbo as a scholar, someone who understood Buddhism conceptually, who could explain emptiness and enlightenment with sophisticated eloquence. And what did Huangbo show him? That all of it was reflection, appearance, moon in water. Not wrong, not useless, but not the real thing. Like someone who has read every book about swimming but never gotten in the water. Consider your own relationship with spiritual or philosophical ideas. How many concepts do you carry about who you are? What enlightenment means? What it would take to be free? These ideas can be beautiful, can be inspiring, can point toward truth. But the moment you mistake the idea for the reality, the moment you think that understanding something means you have realized it, you are reaching for the moon in the water. The real moon, that simple, direct, immediate awareness that is reading these words right now remains untouched by any concept you have about it. This is not an anti-intellectual teaching. Huangbo himself was extraordinarily learned. Pei Xiu continued to study sutras and write commentaries. The point is not to reject understanding, but to see through it, to recognize that no matter how sophisticated your concepts become, they are still appearances in awareness, not awareness itself. They are like beautifully painted pictures of fire. They can show you what fire looks like, but they will never keep you warm. In contemporary terms, this might be the difference between reading about mindfulness and actually being present. You can understand intellectually that thoughts are just thoughts, that you are not your emotions, that the present moment is all there is. You can explain this to others. You can even teach workshops on it. But if you have not actually recognized the space of awareness that holds all these thoughts and emotions, if you are still identified with the thinking about presence rather than simply being present, then you are still in the realm of reflection. How do you move from reflection to reality? Not by trying harder to understand, not by reading more books or attending more retreats or perfecting your meditation technique, but by what Huangbo called sudden entry, a moment where the thinking stops, the reaching stops, and there is simply this awareness, this presence, this now, not as a concept, not as something special, but as the ordinary, obvious, ever-present fact of being conscious. And here is what makes this both simple and difficult. It is simple because there is nothing to acquire, nothing to achieve. Awareness is already here. You cannot be more aware than you already are. You can only recognize what has always been the case. But it is difficult because the thinking mind resists this simplicity. It wants something to do, something to accomplish, some way to become the one who gets enlightened. The mind wants to turn awareness into an object it can grasp, study, understand. And the moment it does this, awareness appears to recede, becomes something over there that you are over here trying to reach. This is the moon in water trap. The thinking mind creates a reflection of awareness and then tries to grasp it, not realizing that the very act of grasping is what makes it unreachable. It is like trying to grab your own hand. The grabber and the grabbed are not two separate things. The awareness, looking for awareness, is already what it seeks. But it cannot see this while it is busy looking, while it is turned into a subject seeking an object. So what happens when this is seen clearly? When Pei Xiu recognized that all his understanding was moon in water, when he stopped trying to figure out awareness and simply was aware, what changed? Not the awareness itself. That has never changed, can never change. What changed was the relationship to experience. Experience continued thoughts, sensations, perceptions, emotions, all still appearing. But the sense of being a separate someone to whom all this was happening, that relaxed, not through effort, not through practice, but through seeing that it had always been a reflection, an appearance, empty of substance. This is what Huangbo meant by no activity. Not that you stop doing things, not that you become passive or indifferent, but that the doing happens without a ghost doer claiming ownership of it. Life continues, perhaps more vibrantly than before, but it is no longer burdened by the constant commentary of a separate self trying to control and make sense of everything. Let yourself taste this possibility now, just for a moment. What if there is no one here who needs to figure anything out? What if awareness is simply being aware, as it always is, and the sense of being someone struggling to become more aware is just a thought, just a reflection, just moon in water? What if you could stop trying to grasp what you already are? You do not need to answer these questions with thinking. Just let them reverberate in the space behind thought. Let them loosen the grip of the one who is always trying to get somewhere, to become something, to achieve enlightenment. The real moon is shining. It has always been shining. You are the shining itself, not someone separate from it. Rest in that. Trust that. Let everything else be moon in water, beautiful and temporary, appearing and dissolving, while what you actually are remains exactly as it has always been: awake, aware. Here, your eyes are growing heavy now. Your body is releasing into sleep. But the awareness that knows this, that is present for this softening and settling, that does not sleep, does not change, is never born and never dies. It is like the space that contains the day and the night, but is neither. You are that. You have always been that. Rest now in what you have always been. Nothing to reach for, nothing to become. Just this eternal now, holding everything, disturbed by nothing. Sleep well. Now we journey from the harsh mountains of China to the lush river valleys of Vietnam, to the 20th century, to meet a teacher whose gentle presence would transform how millions understand the nature of existence. Born Nguyen Xuan Bao in 1926, in the ancient city of Hue, he would become known to the world as Thich Nhat Hanh. But before he became a teacher whose words touched presidents and peasants alike, before his calligraphy graced meditation halls on 6 continents, he was simply a young monk struggling with the same questions that have haunted seekers for millennia. The Vietnam he grew up in was a land of extraordinary beauty caught in the machinery of violence. Colonial, occupation, war, division. These were the conditions that shaped his early years in the monastery. While other monks focused on liturgy and scripture, young Thich Nhat Hanh found himself drawn to a different kind of Buddhism, one that could address not just individual suffering but the collective anguish of a people torn apart by conflict. In 1961, when he was 35 years old and teaching at a Buddhist university in Saigon, Thich Nhat Hanh had an insight that would crystallize his entire approach to understanding reality. He was walking beside a river, watching the water flow, watching how the current carried leaves and branches downstream. He noticed how a single leaf, separate and distinct, was nevertheless completely dependent on the water, the current, the wind, the tree that grew it. Remove any of these conditions and there would be no leaf. Add different conditions and the leaf would be different, or would not exist at all. This was not new to him philosophically. He had studied dependent origination, understood intellectually that all things arise from causes and conditions. But something about watching that actual leaf in that actual water made the teaching come alive. The leaf did not exist over there as a separate object. It existed only in relationship to everything else. Its very being was relationship. Its substance was connection itself. And suddenly, He saw that this was true not just for leaves, but for everything. For the river itself, which was only a river because of banks that contained it, rain that filled it, gravity that pulled it downward. For the city surrounding the river, which existed only because of the people who built it, the trade routes that sustained it, the history that created the conditions for its founding. For himself, Thich Nhat Hanh, who existed only because of parents and teachers, food and air, language and culture. Pull out any thread of this vast interconnected web and the whole thing would change. Nothing stood alone. Nothing possessed independent existence. But then the insight deepened. If nothing exists independently, if everything is actually relationship, connection, mutual dependence, then the traditional language of Buddhism, talking about things being empty, beings being interdependent, was still subtly misleading, because it implied that there were things which then happened to be empty, beings which then happened to be interdependent, when actually there were no things at all. There was only the interdepending itself, the relating itself. The world was not made of separate objects that then interacted. It was made of interaction itself, of relationship itself, of the betweenness that traditional logic tried to eliminate. He needed a new word, a new way of speaking that would capture this. And standing there beside the river, watching that leaf float past, the word came to him: interbeing. Not being as in separate existence, but interbeing as in mutual co-rising. Nothing simply is. Everything inter-is. The leaf inter-is with the tree. The tree inter-is with the sun and rain. The sun inter-is with the universe. And all of it inter-is together in a seamless web where trying to find the boundary of anything is like trying to find where waves end and ocean begins. Over the following decades, Thich Nhat Hanh would develop this insight into a teaching that spoke deeply to Western audiences, hungry for wisdom that addressed both personal and collective suffering. In 1987, during a retreat in California, he offered a teaching that would become one of his most famous. He held up a sheet of paper. "If you are a poet," he said, his voice soft but clear, "you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. And without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are. Interbeing is a word that is not in the dictionary yet, but if we combine the prefix inter with the verb to be, we have a new verb, interbe." He paused, looking at the paper with gentle attention, as though it were teaching him rather than him teaching about it. If we look into this sheet of paper even more deeply, we can see the sunshine in it. If the sunshine is not there, the forest cannot grow. In fact, nothing can grow. Even we cannot grow without sunshine. So we know that the sunshine is also in this sheet of paper. The paper and the sunshine inter-are. And if we continue to look, we can see the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see the wheat. We know the logger cannot exist without his daily bread, and therefore the wheat that became his bread is also in this sheet of paper. And the logger's father and mother are in it too. When we look in this way, we see that without all of these things, this sheet of paper cannot exist. Someone in the audience raised their hand. "But teacher, if everything is in everything else, where is the paper itself? What is its own nature?" Thich Nhat Hanh smiled. "That is exactly the question. Looking deeply, we cannot find a separate self in the paper. We find only interbeing. If we remove the cloud, remove the sunshine, remove the logger, remove the wheat, there is no paper left. The paper is empty of a separate self. But this does not mean the paper does not exist. It means its existence is not independent. It exists only in relationship to everything else. Its very being is interbeing. But then his expression grew more serious. Now, let me show you something else. If we look even more deeply, we see not only space in this sheet of paper, but we also see time. We see that the cloud was there in the past, and the rain fell, and the tree grew. The logger's parents met and fell in love. Centuries of paper-making knowledge developed. The truck that brought the paper to the store burned fuel that came from ancient plants. We cannot point to this paper and say it began at one moment. Its beginning is beginningless. It has always been connected to everything else. He held the paper up to a candle on the altar. And if I burn this paper, does it disappear? No. It transforms into smoke, into heat, into ash. These things go into the air, into the earth. Eventually they become part of new things, new trees, new clouds, new paper perhaps. The paper has no birth and no death. It only transforms. When conditions come together, we say, paper appears. When conditions change, we say, paper disappears. But nothing is actually born and nothing actually dies. There is only transformation, only the endless dance of interbeing. This teaching moved people deeply, but some were troubled. A student asked, "Teacher, if nothing really exists independently, if everything is empty of separate self, then what about me? Do I not really exist? Is my suffering just an illusion?" Thich Nhat Hanh shook his head firmly. Your suffering is real. Your pain is real. Your joy is real. But the separate, permanent, independent self you think is having these experiences, that is like the moon reflected in water. You exist, yes, but you exist the way the paper exists, the way the wave exists, not as something separate from the ocean, but as a manifestation of it. Your body interis with the air you breathe, the food you eat, your parents and ancestors. Your mind interis with your teachers, your culture, your language. Your emotions interis with the people around you, the situations you encounter. You are a unique expression, yes, but you are not a separate thing. You are relationship itself, made temporarily visible. Then how do I care for myself if there is no self to care for? The student persisted. Thich Nhat Hanh said, his eyes warm with understanding. You see the trap? You think that if there is no separate self, then there is no one to take care of, no reason to practice compassion, no point in healing suffering. But this is backwards. When you realize interbeing, when you see that you are not separate from anything, compassion becomes natural. Not because you should be compassionate, not because it is moral or spiritual, but because harming others is harming yourself. Literally, if everything inter is, then the boundary between self and other is like the boundary between waves. Useful conventionally, but ultimately illusory. When one wave harms another, the ocean harms itself. When you pollute a river, you poison the water you will drink tomorrow. When you cause suffering to another person, you damage the web of interbeing that you are part of. This is not philosophy. This is fact. This teaching about interbeing spread widely, touching people across traditions and cultures. But what made it especially powerful was that Thich Nhat Hanh did not just teach it, he lived it. During the Vietnam War, when asked by reporters whether he supported the North or the South, he refused to take sides, insisting that to choose one side against the other was to fail to see their interbeing. He worked to relieve suffering wherever he found it, helping victims on both sides, because he saw that there were no sides, only suffering seeking relief. For this refusal to divide reality into us versus them, both governments considered him an enemy. He lived in exile for nearly 40 years, unable to return to his homeland because he insisted on seeing the moon instead of its reflection in partisan water. Now feel how this teaching reaches into your own life. You believe yourself to be a separate person, distinct from everyone and everything else. You have your memories, your preferences, your body, your thoughts. All of this seems undeniably yours, undeniably separate from what is out there. But is this actually true when examined closely? The oxygen you are breathing right now came from trees. Those trees grew from soil that contains decomposed plants and animals from millions of years ago. The water in your body came from clouds that rained over oceans that contained fish that ate plankton that absorbed sunlight. Where is the boundary between you and not you? Where does your body actually end and the world begin? And what about your mind? Every thought you think uses language you did not invent. Every idea you have is built from concepts you learned from others. Your values, your personality, your way of seeing the world, all of it was shaped by parents, teachers, friends, enemies, books, experiences. Take away all these influences, and what remains? Not some pure original self, but nothing at all. You are made of relationships. You are woven from conditions. You do not have a self, you are selfing. A verb, a process, a continuous becoming that depends on everything else. This might sound frightening at first. If there is no solid, separate self, then who are you? What happens to your identity, your uniqueness, your value? But Thich Nhat Hanh offers something radical here. You do not lose anything by seeing through the illusion of separation. You gain everything. You gain connection. You gain belonging. You gain understanding that you are not an isolated wave buffeted by an uncaring ocean, but that you are the ocean itself, appearing temporarily as this particular wave, inseparable from the whole. When the separate self is seen as a reflection rather than a reality, loneliness dissolves. Not because you are now surrounded by people, but because you see that you have never been separate. Anxiety about whether you matter decreases, not because you develop confidence, but because you recognize that the question, "Do I matter?" it assumes you are separate from the mattering. The relief from suffering that comes with this insight is not the relief of having solved a problem. It is the relief of realizing the problem was based on a misunderstanding. Think of it this way. A wave might feel anxious about dying, about disappearing when it crashes on the shore. But the wave is not separate from the ocean. When the waveform dissolves, nothing is actually lost. The water remains, takes new form, becomes new waves. If the wave could recognize itself as ocean, the fear of death would dissolve. Not because death no longer happens, but because death is seen as transformation rather than ending. You are like that wave. The form you think of as me will change, will eventually dissolve. This is undeniable. But what you actually are not the form, but the awareness, the life, the consciousness that takes form as you, that does not end. It transforms. It is differently. The boundaries you think define you are like lines drawn in water, useful for a moment, but never truly separating anything from anything else. Let this understanding settle not into thinking, but into being. Let the edges of you soften. Let yourself feel the air on your skin and recognize that this exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is blurring the boundary between inside and outside. Let yourself remember where your food came from and recognize that earth and sun are becoming you, literally becoming your body. Let yourself notice how your mood shifts when you are around different people and recognize that you are not psychologically separate from your environment either. You are not a thing interbeing with other things. You are interbeing itself, temporarily taking this particular form, this particular name, this particular perspective. And from this recognition comes not nihilism but reverence, not indifference but profound care. Because if everything is, then caring for anything is caring for yourself. Protecting the environment is protecting your body, which is made of environment. Treating others with kindness is treating yourself with kindness, because there is no actual separation between you and them except in thought. The moon reflected in the water appears separate from the moon in the sky, but both are reflections of the same light. Both are appearing within the same awareness. Both are in the seamless web of being itself, which has no center and no edges, which is simultaneously everything and nothing, which is what you have always been beneath and beyond the story of being someone separate. Rest in this vastness now. You are not lost in it. You are it, temporarily localized, temporarily named, temporarily believing in separation. But the separation is dream, is moon and water, is appearance empty of substance. What you actually are is larger than you imagined, more connected than you feared, safer than you hoped. You are held by everything, as everything, in everything. Rest as that. Sleep as that. You have never been separate. You have always been home. Always been whole. Always been free. Let your breath be soft as feather down now. Let your limbs grow heavy as ancient stones. Let your awareness expand to hold this room, this building, this city, this earth, this universe. Or let it contract to nothing at all. It does not matter. It is all interbeing, all one seamless totality appearing as multiplicity, all moon and water playing on the surface of what cannot be divided. You are safe here in the dream of separation. You are safe here in the reality of interbeing. Sleep comes like a friend, gentle and welcoming. Trust it now. You are held. Now we journey to Tibet, to the 14th century, to the high plateaus where the air is thin and the sky seems closer than anywhere else on earth. Here we meet a yogi named Longchenpa, one of the most revered masters of the Dzogchen tradition, whose teachings about the mirror-like nature of mind would illuminate countless practitioners across centuries. Longchenpa had not always been a yogi living in mountain caves. He was born Tsangma Oser to a scholarly family in 1308. His father was a teacher of Tantra, his mother a devout practitioner. From childhood, he was educated in the elaborate philosophical systems of Tibetan Buddhism, the stages of the path, the classifications of consciousness, the intricate maps of spiritual development. By his early 20s, he could debate the most subtle points of Madhyamaka philosophy with the sharpest scholars of his generation. But something felt empty in all this knowledge. He could explain emptiness beautifully, He could describe how all phenomena arise from interdependent conditions and lack inherent existence. He could trace the logic that led to these conclusions and show their consistency with scripture and reasoning. Yet none of it touched the actual experience of being alive, of being aware. It was like having a detailed map of a country he had never visited. At 28, disillusioned with scholarly life, Longchenpa left the monastery and went to find a teacher named Kumarajiva, who was said to practice Dzogchen, the great perfection teaching that pointed directly to the nature of mind. Longchenpa climbed for 3 days into the remote mountains of central Tibet to reach the cave where this master lived. When he arrived, exhausted and hungry, he found Kumarajiva sitting on a rock outside his cave, apparently doing nothing, just sitting, looking at the valley spread below. Longchenpa bowed formally and explained that he had come seeking teaching. Kumarajiva did not respond. He simply continued gazing at the distance. After a long silence, he pointed at the sky. "What is that?" he asked. Longchenpa looked up. "The sky," he said, uncertain where this was going. "Describe it." "It is vast, empty, blue, unchanging." Spacious Longchenpa began listing attributes, but Kumarajiva cut him off. "Those are thoughts about sky," the master said. "I did not ask for thoughts. Look at the actual sky right now and tell me what it is." Longchenpa looked again. But the moment he tried to say what he saw, he realized he was creating concepts, imposing language, dividing the seamless experience into categories. The actual sky, prior to thought, was... What? He could not say without betraying it. "Good," Kumarajiva said. "Now look at your mind the same way. Not your thoughts about mind. Not concepts like clear or empty or aware, but the actual mind itself, right now, prior to concept. What is it?" This question became Longchenpa's practice for the next 6 months. He sat in meditation for hours each day, trying to look directly at the mind that was doing the looking. Every time he thought he saw it, he realized he was looking at an object, a thought, a sensation, a mental construct. But mind itself, the awareness that knew all these objects, remained elusive. It was like trying to see the eye that sees. The moment he thought, "There it is," he had already turned it into a something, an object of perception, which meant it was not what he was looking for. Gradually, subtly, his practice began to shift. Instead of trying to find mind as an object, he began to recognize it as the subject that could never be objectified. It was not something he could look at. It was what was looking, not a thing with boundaries and characteristics, but the open space in which all things appeared. And this space was not separate from its contents, not some empty container holding phenomena. The space and what appeared in it were non-dual, inseparable, like a mirror and the reflections it shows. One morning, Longchenpa was sitting in meditation as dawn broke. The cave faced east, and as the sun rose, light suddenly flooded through the entrance, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. They were beautiful, catching the light, dancing in the beam. And he noticed something curious. The dust particles were clearly visible, but the space they moved through was invisible. You could not see the space directly, only infer it from the movement of what was in it. And yet the space was more fundamental than the particles. The particles could come and go, but the space remained. The space allowed the particles to appear, held them without grasping, let them move without resistance. And in that moment, Longchenpa saw that mind was like this. Not like space metaphorically, but actually sharing the same quality. Mind was the invisible dimension in which all experience appeared: thoughts, sensations, perceptions, emotions, all of it arising and dissolving in this open awareness that could not itself be seen as an object, but was the condition for all seeing. And just as space was not separate from what appeared in it, mind was not separate from its contents. The thoughts were not happening in awareness like dust in a cave. The thoughts were appearances of awareness itself, momentarily taking form, like clouds momentarily taking shape in sky. He went to find Kumarajiva, who was gathering firewood near the cave. "I think I see it," Longchenpa said. "Mind is like space. It is empty but not nothing. It allows everything to appear while remaining unchanged. It is luminous, it lights up experience, yet it cannot be grasped or defined." Kumarajiva set down his firewood. "Better," he said, "but you are still making it into something. The moment you say, 'mind is like space,' you create separation. There is mind, and there is space, and they are similar. But mind is not a thing that resembles other things. It is primordial, original, without reference point. Let me show you something." He led Longchenpa to a small stream that ran near the cave. The water was crystal clear, flowing over smooth stones. "Look at the water," Kumarajiva said. "What do you see?" "Water flowing," Longchenpa answered. "Look again. Look at the surface." Longchenpa looked, and then he saw it. The surface of the water was reflecting the sky, the mountains, the trees along the bank. The reflections were perfect, vivid, absolutely clear. And yet, they had no substance. They were appearances only. You could not reach into the water and pull out a mountain. The mountain appeared in the water, but it was not in the water. It was reflection, image, display. "Mind is like this," Kumarajiva said. "Everything you experience, thoughts, emotions, perceptions, the sense of self, all of it is reflection. Appearance. Like mountains reflected in water. They appear vividly. They seem undeniably real, but they have no substance apart from their appearing. They are displays of awareness itself, playing on the surface of mind, like reflections play on water. And just as you do not need to change the reflections or improve them or get rid of them, they are fine as they are, you do not need to change your experience. You only need to recognize its nature. You only need to see that what appears is reflection, display, the self-appearing radiance of awareness itself. Something shifted permanently in Longchenpa in that moment. For years afterward, he would write about what he had realized using many different poetic images. He called it the self-arising, pristine awareness. He described it as a mirror that reflects everything without being stained or changed by what it reflects. He compared it to the sky that holds all weather without being affected by clouds or storms or sunshine. He spoke of it as a crystal ball that takes on the color of whatever cloth is beneath it, yet is itself colorless. But all these images pointed to the same recognition. Mind is not a thing you have. Mind is what you are. And what you are is more like open space or clear mirror than like a solid object or a separate self. Experience arises in this openness. From this openness, as this openness, the contents of awareness, thoughts, sensations, perceptions are not problems to be solved or obstacles to enlightenment. They are the self-display of awareness itself, like light dancing, like reflections playing on water. They have never been separate from the awareness that knows them. They have never been solid. They have always been empty appearance, luminous display, moon in water. And the separate self you think you are, that too is reflection. It appears vividly. It seems undeniably real. But when you look for it directly, when you try to find this one who is having all these experiences, you find only more experienced thoughts about self, sensations of self, memories that create continuity, but no actual solid thing you can point to and say, that is me. Just reflection, just appearance, just the play of awareness mistaking itself for something limited and separate. When this is recognized, really recognized, not just understood conceptually, something profound relaxes. The effort to become enlightened drops away because you see that what you are has never been unenlightened. The fear of death eases because you see that what you actually are is the deathless space in which birth and death appear. The burden of being someone, of maintaining an identity, of defending a position, all of it becomes optional. You can still use the concept of self. You can still function in the world with a name and preferences and a coherent story. But you are no longer trapped by it. You see through it. Like seeing a rainbow and knowing it is light refracted through water. Beautiful, but insubstantial. Real as appearance, but empty of independent existence. Now let Longchenpa's realization guide you into sleep. Your mind right now is that same mirror, that same open space. Thoughts are arising, thoughts about this teaching. Thoughts about your day. Thoughts about tomorrow. Let them arise. They are not problems. They are not obstacles. They are the self-display of awareness, like clouds drifting across the sky, like reflections dancing on water. You do not need to get rid of them. You do not need to control them. Just recognize their nature. Just see that they appear but have no substance, that they are the play of awareness itself, empty luminosity shining. And the one who is thinking these thoughts, the one who is listening to these words, that too is appearance. That too is reflection. Look for this one who you think you are. Try to find where this self is located. Is it in your head, in your heart, spread throughout your body? The more closely you look, the more it seems to recede, to dissolve into smaller and smaller components, none of which can be definitely pointed to as me. And yet, awareness remains. Knowing remains. Presence remains, prior to and independent of any story about who is present. You are that. The mirror, the space, the open awareness in which all of life appears and disappears like dreams, like reflections, like the moon in water. Solid seeming, but fundamentally empty. Vivid, but insubstantial. Real as appearance, empty as essence. Rest is this awareness now. Not trying to be it, you already are it. Just recognizing what has always been the case. Just letting the mirror be mirror, clear and reflective, unchanged by anything that appears in it. Sleep is coming. Another appearance in awareness. Another display. The body growing heavy, the breath slowing, consciousness shifting state. All of it known by that which never sleeps, never changes, is always here. You are that. You have always been that. The moon in water story is ending, but the moon remains, shining, luminous, free. Rest now. Sleep now. You are safe in what you have always been. Nothing to fear. Nothing to lose. Only appearance appearing, knowing itself, playing in the infinite space of your true nature. Good night, dear one. Rest well. We have traveled together through the wisdom of 8 profound teachers, from Korean hermit Jinmu to Tibetan yogi Longchenpa, from Japanese nun Chiono to Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh. Each one discovered in their own way the same liberating truth that what we take to be solid reality is often reflection. Appearance. Moon in water. Beautiful. Yes. Functional. Yes. But ultimately empty of the independent existence we imagine it has. What remains when the illusions are seen through is not nothing, not meaningless emptiness, not cold indifference. What remains is simple presence, luminous awareness, the capacity to know and be and experience without needing it all to mean something fixed and permanent. What remains is freedom, not freedom from life, but freedom within life. Freedom to live fully without being trapped by your story about living. Freedom to love without clinging. Freedom to care deeply while holding everything lightly. Freedom to be exactly what you already are beneath every idea about what you should become. Let these teachings dissolve now like salt in water. You do not need to remember every story, every detail, every teaching point. They have already done their work, planting seeds that will grow in darkness, in silence, in the rich soil of your own direct experience. You do not need to understand anything. You do not need to figure anything out. Just rest. Just breathe. Just be here, in this bed, in this darkness, in this eternal. Now that is always and only what there is. Tomorrow when you wake, you may notice something has softened. Perhaps you will not take your thoughts quite so seriously. Perhaps you will catch yourself reaching for moon and water and smile at the futility. Perhaps you will feel more connected, more at home, more at ease with the beautiful, broken, perfect imperfection of being human. These are the gifts of seeing through illusion, not transcendence of life, but intimacy with it. Not escape from the world, but recognition of what the world actually is beneath our stories about it. If tonight brought you some peace, feel free to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps others find these ancient teachings when they need them most. When the suffering of mistaking reflection for reality becomes too much to bear alone. But more than anything, I hope you sleep deeply. I hope you wake refreshed. I hope these teachings accompany you gently into whatever comes next. You are enough, exactly as you are. Your life is sacred, exactly as it is. Nothing is actually broken. Nothing truly needs fixing. The moon has been shining all along. You were just looking at reflections, mistaking them for the real thing. But now you know. And knowing this changes everything without changing anything at all. Sleep well, dear friend. Rest in what you are, not what you think you are. Rest in the awareness that holds all things, is disturbed by nothing, fears nothing, loses nothing, is always already complete. You are that. You have always been that. Let that truth carry you into dreams, into sleep, into the mystery of another day waiting to unfold. The moon is shining. The water is still. All is exactly as it should be. Nothing to do. Nowhere to go. No one to become. Just this. Just breath. Just being. Good night.